for our listeners and viewers who don't know, I mean, this talk about expansion, it's always been the idea that it would be lining the owners' pockets, and the owners would be getting a massive chunk of money from any sort of expansion fee. I'm curious what you think, Kurt, about the argument that's been made by Mark Cuban publicly that he's shown some pause towards expansion because he views this almost as a short-term loan for owners when you start talking about the maximization of the TV deals and how much money has been coming into the NBA.
I think what people don't understand is when you expand and add a new team, instead of a share of all the revenues being 1/30th, it becomes 1/31st. So effectively, you're losing 3% of your share of revenues. And given the how big, and this is all publicly reported, how big the TV numbers are, the shared TV numbers are, 3% of a big number is a very big number. And so, and actually, when we added Charlotte, I tried to explain this to a former owner, and I was like, you don't understand. You're not, they're paying us 300 million, but it's just, they're not really paying us 300 million. They're just loaning us the money, and we're paying it back 1/30th of our TV revenues at a time. And so they're effectively getting the franchise for free. And so in order for it, do you see what I'm saying there, right? Because for the sake of example, if our TV revenues are $1 billion split 30 ways, then each team is making 33 million. If now it's split 31 ways, each team is making 32 million, right? Or 31 million, whatever it is. And so the delta, you divide that into the amount of the franchise fee, and that's the loan you're getting back. So if that loan is in the billions, okay, it's probably worth it because it's going to take forever to take it back, to pay it back. But if it's not just an enormous number, then it's just a loan. And so rather than expanding, you look at moving a team, and nobody wants to move a team right now.
I mean, what do you think about this argument that really, given the amount of money that the owners are making off the new TV deal potentially, and now with this collective bargaining agreement, they don't necessarily need to expand?
They don't need to expand 100%. I mean, and people like Mark Cuban and some others within the league would argue that it's always a bad bet to expand, because you are giving up equity forever, in perpetuity, that you previously had. So to take the money up front is a bad long-term investment if you're an owner. If you're planning on staying in the NBA for the next 20, 30 years, it's going to be a bad return on investment. Now, if you're someone who's looking to get out of the NBA ownership in the next 5 years and capitalize on these big valuations, 100% you want to expand. You want that upfront check. But there is a number, and I think it's important to understand that the markets that you expand to are very important. Are they going to be accretive to the long-term growth of the league? And I think that's very important. Just taking a short-term check is a bad bet. And I think you'd have trouble getting owners buying in for that. But if you can make the argument that adding expansion team X and Y are in the right cities, have the right owners, the right buildings, which are the three main things that each expansion bid has to have locked in place. If those three are all positives, then that's good for the league long term. If you're bringing in more fans, more money long term, then those markets are good. And again, and if you're splitting up $8 billion, that's good too. That is so there is, and that's why we go back to how we started here with the TV number and the CPA number. It kind of locks in what the league's economics look like for the next 10 years for the most part. The TV is an overwhelmingly large portion of your revenue. Sponsorship deals are long term. Attendance doesn't fluctuate much from year to year. And so you know really what your revenues are looking like for the next 10 years. So there is a number, and there's all sorts of bankers who will run it through their complicated spreadsheets that makes the owners okay with bringing in 2 new partners. Again, 2 new good owners, that opens up a lot of doors also. I mean, the NBA has been, it's a really strong ownership group. I mean, if you look from 1 to 30, with the new owners that have come in and their business backgrounds, it's a very progressive league. It's always looking to kind of what's next, whether it's, you know, they've kind of been the leaders when you're talking about opening up to private equity, now opening up to sovereign wealth funds or other institutional forms of capital through endowments, pension funds. And so they've always kind of been a leader. And I mean, if you're comparing the 30, the NFL's the king of the jungle because everybody watches on TV, it's great, but you know, it's not the most dynamic ownership group, because I mean, the reality is the average ownership tenure is 40 years. You've had groups that have owned them for 100 years in the same families, and they're not necessarily business leaders. I mean, they've been incredibly successful with their NFL clubs, but that's just kind of the nature of the sport, and not necessarily because of these individuals. So I think there's a number out there that makes everybody happy, and you'll have, you know, a few owners will clap back and not want this, but I think, you know, when you start talking about Seattle and Las Vegas being, you know, the clear front runners, I think you get enough people on board that this is a reality.
And you think it makes more sense from a financial aspect for the NBA to expand rather than relocate a team, given the amount of money that we're talking about here?
I think so, and move. You know, I mean, the cities that get talked about with relocating. I mean, it's the small market teams. It's Memphis, New Orleans. They don't necessarily have the corporate support that the others do, but you know, taking teams out of cities is, as fans in Seattle know all too well, that leaves a long-term scar. Again, these are smaller cities than Seattle, so maybe it's not a deep a scar, and the history isn't as deep in those 2 cities with the basketball teams, because they moved from other cities, so it's not like there's decades and decades of long history in those 2 cities. But I think removing them is much less preferred than on the expansion side, would be my understanding, and from talking to people, you know, in the business, that is really not what the NBA is looking for.